I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., I welcome you to our America at a Crossroads program tonight. A special welcome back to David Lehrer. It's great to have you back, and an extra special welcome to our C-SPAN audience. Thank you to our leadership team, including Zev Yaroslavsky and former Congressman Mel Levine, for all the work you do. We are very grateful. It's great to work together. We also thank tonight's esteemed guest, David Gergen, and our exceptional moderator, Madeleine Brand. It's wonderful to welcome you both back to America at a Crossroads, now in its 171st week of consecutive weekly virtual programming. We join the voices expressing our deepest concern for those in Maui, still in the midst of this terrible catastrophic events last week, and our deepest sympathies to those who have lost friends and family. Next Wednesday, on August 23rd, we will hear from one of the most respected abortion law experts in the country, Mary Ziegler. She will be speaking about abortion crisis in a post-Roe world. Mary Ziegler with Madeleine Brand. It should be a wonderful program. Mary Ziegler has written about 6 books on the topic of the American abortion debate, one very recently, and it should be an extraordinary hour. And then on August 30th, we will hear from the Dean of Berkeley School of Law, Erwin Chemerinsky, considered by most to be one of the most brilliant constitutional law scholars in the country. He will be speaking about our Constitution, our Supreme Court, and our American future. There certainly is a great deal to learn from him and to speak about during that hour. It will be moderated by UC Irvine School of Law's Henry Weinstein, formerly the legal reporter for the Los Angeles Times. We have posted most of our September lineup, and you can register in the email you will get after tonight's program. But to tell you more about what's coming up, my friend and colleague back from vacation, David Lehrer. David?
Thank you, Janice. It's a pleasure to be here. I welcome all of you to America at a Crossroads on behalf of community advocates. And a special welcome to our live nationwide C-SPAN audience. We're pleased to have you with us as well. It's challenging to come back from vacation and the pleasure of disconnection. Unfortunately, that pleasure doesn't last very long. The daunting issues in our future remain uncertain. That's why we're still here after 171 weekly broadcasts, as Janice mentioned. Janice just mentioned also the next 2 programs, but we have much more on tap. On September 6th, we'll have a return visit from Lieutenant Colonel retired Alex Vindman. Alex will offer his insights on foreign policy regarding Russia, the Ukraine, and military and strategic affairs. He was the head of the European desk at the National Security Council during a good part of the Trump administration. He also served at our embassies in both Moscow and Kyiv, the land of his birth. He'll be talking with KPCC's Larry Mantle. We will then host experts on millennials and other potentially game-changing cohorts. 3 experts, Mac Heller, Celinda Lake, and Morley Winograd, will discuss the changing demographics of electoral politics. That will be on September 20th. The following week, we welcome one of our most popular guests, Sarah Longwell, the maven on voting trends and Republican politics. She's a frequent guest on Network News, a leading never-Trumper, and always a compelling guest. Her analysis of next week's Wisconsin debate and its fallout will be revealing. She'll be in dialogue with formerly KCRW's Warren Aldi. It's now my pleasure to welcome back one of our regular hosts who's been missing for a few months because of her work commitments, Madeleine Brand. She's an Emmy Award-winning veteran of both PBS and NPR, nationally and locally. And for the past 9 years, she's hosted the award-winning daily news and culture show, Press Play, on NPR station KCRW in Santa Monica. Always a delight. Madeleine?
Thank you so much. It's so great to be back from a minor absence, but happily only a temporary absence. I'm really happy to be back with you and very excited to speak with David Gergen, noted distinguished political analyst whom I grew up watching on my television screen. He served as White House speechwriter for President Nixon, director of communications for both Presidents Ford and Reagan, and as a senior advisor to President Clinton. He graduated with honors from Yale and Harvard Law School and has been awarded 27 honorary degrees. He's a professor of public service and the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's also a senior political analyst for CNN. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Madeleine. It's good to be here with you. David, welcome back. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, so we have something to talk about. I saw a little bit.
Oh no, it's so quiet. Is there anything to talk about out there?
I don't know, but we've had a couple of days to digest this latest salvo, this latest indictment, the fourth, I believe, or maybe the fifth if you include the superseding, out of Georgia. It is sweeping. You've got Donald Trump, of course, plus 18 others covering racketeering and 40 other crimes. What is your assessment so far about the strategy that you can surmise through reading this indictment from DA Fani Willis?
The strategy of the prosecutor or the strategy of Donald Trump?
Well, we'll get to Donald Trump, but let's start with the prosecutor.
Well, I think that one of the things that's really striking is how sweeping and how many charges there are, how many counts there are, versus the kind of approach which was taken by Jack Smith when he was going through his portion of the investigation. And the Smith questions were very precise, very much to the point. And, he'd really done his homework. And what appears is that one in the new set of allegations, in its much more sweeping form, could knock down a lot of things, but it may not be as compelling as the one when you're more precise.
More because it's just so diffuse, because there will be
so diffuse. You have 19 people here with somewhat 90 counts for 19 people. You can see this becoming a cottage industry over the next few years, because it takes you can't treat all the people alike. You've got to consider each one what their role was in particular days in question. And then does that merit being included in the group, or should they be dropped? Those are the kind of questions you face. And also, it's going to be easier for Jack Smith, because he's in federal cases. And the 4 indictments, 2 are federal and 2 are not federal. And the difference, of course, is on the federal ones, if you're indicted for violating a federal law and you're found to be a criminal felon, the President of the United States cannot pardon you, nor can the governor of the state where this occurs. So you're in a situation where the parties the Trump people would very, very much like to get Trump into a position where he can be pardoned, but it's much, much tougher if the female prosecutor in the case against the 19, if she can carry that case, the chances for the only way Trump gets off is he'd have to win the general election, and then in some ways or somehow navigate the Justice Department to get rid of the case. In that case, you could see Trump walking away. Otherwise, the chances are rising rapidly that he's going to jail.
Yeah, and imagine that. Well, what if, just spinning out the most bizarre scenario, if he wins and he's also in prison? What happens then?
Yeah. Well, if he wins, he does, as I say, he's no longer subject to the laws of Georgia, but he's subject to the federal laws. And under federal laws, he could arguably, and this has never been tried before, but he could arguably get the victory and then resign from the presidency for one day, give it to the vice president to pardon him or pardon himself, and then test that in the courts. That would have to be tested constitutionally, but that is one way to get there. The other way is to come in with guns blazing, to cut off the head of the attorney general, put a new person, a lackey in charge in the Justice Department, and and fire everybody, start again, and ride it out. He could do that. I think is extremely unlikely to succeed.
So she has said today, Fani Willis, the DA in Georgia, that she wants a March 3rd trial date.
Yes.
So looking at all of the other trial dates that have been announced, or the desire for these trial dates to be announced, you have January 2nd for Jack Smith's federal case, the January 6th case. Then you'd have the March 3rd Georgia case, then March 25th, the New York City case, the Stormy Daniels case. And then in May, the classified documents case.
Yes.
This is all during the GOP and the Democratic primary season. where there will be primaries. I think the Georgia primary is March 12th. So all of this would putatively, if there are no delays, big if, happen next spring.
Yeah, it's, this is again, because there are 19 people involved. This is complicated. I think in my judgment, I don't know the prosecutor personally. She obviously has a lot of experience and is well regarded. On this particular question of the day that she has this big court trial date that she wants to have in early March, that's the eve of the March 4th primaries. That's Super Tuesday. It's the eve of the primaries. It does seem to me it may be that was chosen randomly, but there's going to be a lot of suspicion on the right that that's a manufactured date to overwhelm whatever comes out of the primaries and to force Trump into a more minimal position. And that I thought was not very smart. It gives the enemy some ammunition, and you can be sure the enemy will use it.
Well, they're already saying this is politically motivated, right?
Yeah. Well, but particularly to tie it to the primaries, to Super Tuesday, because that's such a magical date in the minds of people who are in politics.
Right. But if you want a speedy trial and you want to get it done before the election, there's only so many dates you can choose.
Well, that's true. On the other hand, you could do it on the Thursday, Friday after the Tuesday or the Monday. All I'm saying is I think it just adds fuel to the fire that this is somehow a put-up job. That argument is making some headway. Unfortunately, I think it's wrong, but you can see the politics of it playing out in ways that one would not have imagined. That Donald Trump could have survived 4 indictments, 4 different cases. I think ultimately he is probably going to go down in some fashion, but it's going to be a fight.
Do you think he will actually see the inside of a prison cell?
I think the chances are less than 50-50, but I think they're more than 25.
Should he be convicted and sentenced and Joe Biden is reelected?
Yeah.
For the sake of the country, should Joe Biden pardon him?
Well, I'm probably partial. I was in the Ford White House when this question arose with Jerry Ford, President Ford, and Richard Nixon. Nixon had just left in scandal, disgrace went out. The first president in American history to have forced to resign because of scandal. But what Ford found was, and he couldn't, when he was trying to govern this as a new, fresh president who was finding his way along, that he had to keep reverting and spending lots and lots of time worried about Nixon and how Nixon was going to be handled. Instead of looking ahead, he was looking past, looking over his shoulder from behind. And he decided he really couldn't govern the country that way. He couldn't be an effective president. And out of the blue, he pardoned Nixon. Well, that caused a storm. It stirred up a storm. Now, Ford knew there would be a storm. I think he could have handled it a little better, frankly, in terms of public perception. But nonetheless, Ford basically lost re-election over that issue. So we're in heavy duty place here. It's very important how these things are handled. I would much prefer that the president not be put in jail personally. I think it will leave such a stain and polarization in our politics. It could take a generation to recover. And what I hope is that we'll have fair trials. Everybody will come away feeling, well, that was fair, no matter how it comes out, and have fair trial. And if he's found to be guilty and a felon, I think that's when you actually take a hard look at the pardon question, because it may well be that you just like to get him the hell out of Dodge, and so you can get ahead with the governing. We're losing, we're in a race for time on so many different fronts, such as the environment, and we're losing that race in part because we're so obsessed about the past, what happened yesterday, and not enough concerned about tomorrow. We shouldn't be having these kind of storms that we see, and we shouldn't be having the kind of fires that we see, and we should have been better prepared for that. When you go back and look at 9/11, I happen to be living in Boston during a big chunk of this. With 9/11, the people there in Boston, they knew there might be a strike, and they had practiced and practiced and practiced how to deal with a strike. They were looking forward. And then when all hell broke loose because of the bombs that went off, here was a striking thing, Madeleine. If you were in the crowd and were hit by something in that 9/11, if you could make it alive to the ambulance, which was right nearby, if you could make it alive to the ambulance, every single person who made it to the ambulance lived. It was remarkable, and it was because they had practiced. And that's what leadership is about. And what we're lacking right now is leadership, strategic leadership, serious leadership of compassion. That it really helps us to reunite as a people coming out of these really dark times, these strange years. We need to find each other in a new way, to redefine who we are and our roles. And I think in particular, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation, to younger generations who are not as scarred up by all this, not as poisoned by all of this, and let them get a fresh start and see if we can't put this country back together.
So what are you saying? I'm going to try to parse what you're saying when it comes to Joe Biden then.
Yeah.
Are you saying that, one, he's not doing the right thing when it comes to climate change? He's not prioritizing it enough? And two, are you saying he shouldn't run for re-election, that he should step aside and let someone else younger run?
I have taken the view for some time that I thought it was better for the country, for both Biden and Trump, to step aside. And I think what we've seen since then is that, the large majorities of this country do not want to see them as being the only people on the tickets. They're looking for fresh faces. There is a hunger for moving on with fresh people. And I admire Joe Biden. I'm a Biden fan, and fundamentally because I think how he responded to the deaths that occurred of his young children and to his son who in the war. I think he had admirably handled it, and he's going through some rough times right now with Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, as one headline suggested, Hunter Biden has become the hunted. And one understands that given the facts, but he was addicted, and I think that people deserve a little more leeway. We're using Hunter Biden as just something we can just beat up on to make political points. And there was a rule in times past. There was a general understanding among presidents that you didn't go after each other's kids. Mm-hmm. You made it a habit of trying to stay out of things like that. And,
well, that's gone. I mean,
yeah, it is gone, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone. But I don't know about the Hunter Biden case, because I guess there's an argument to be made that the mainstream news media ignored this story and let it fester in the right on Fox News and elsewhere, and it became bigger for that that was one of the reasons why it became so big. Had the mainstream media, and by that I mean the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, etc., had they really looked into this and talked about it instead of brushing it aside, maybe it wouldn't be as big a deal now. Who knows?
I think that's a worthy question. I don't know the answer to that. I think there are probably points on both sides, but after all, there was a council, and then now a special counsel has been put into place.
Now,
yeah, and well, you can't necessarily get these things always nip them in the bud. I mean, it's just not the dynamics of our system. Sometimes it takes a lot of effort to get these things up. That's why Fox has been successful up to a point, because it takes these things so seriously. I think you're right that it would have been better to have found it earlier, but I don't think that's the issue we're really dealing with. I think the issue is, how much responsibility do you take as president if your son has become an addict, if your son has the disease of addiction? And Joe Biden could have walked away from his son. He could have been angry with his son. And instead, he's taken the heat. He stood up for his son. And you have to say, look, he's got something, he's got a humanity about him, which I admire. It's just, I think he's also got an age and a condition and a health condition, which makes it difficult, I think, to govern with as much knowledge and as much fortitude, and especially with as much sort of what the small detail. Being president is a hard job, and so much more is expected of the president of the United States than we expected 20, 30, 40 years ago. We heap almost all of our problems on the White House, on the Oval Office, and say, you go fix them. And it's not that simple. What has worked in the past that can work again is to have coalitions. Reagan and Tip O'Neill, one being the most conservative president we've had since the 1920s, and Tip O'Neill, most liberal president we've had since going back to FDR. In today's world, they would be at each other's throats. Just 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when Reagan was president, they actually worked together. And I worked in that White House, and I can tell you they developed bonds of respect. They didn't agree with each other on the policies, but they developed bonds of respect. And eventually they had some bonds of affection. If you'll permit, Madeleine, when a story, when Reagan was president, Tip was the Speaker of the House. It was Tip's birthday coming up, and I think it was his 65th or 70th, one of a significant birthday. And Reagan decided to give him a birthday party in the White House, and he invited Tip's friends in for lunch. They had a fairly large gathering, and after lunch was over, Reagan got up and he'd written out a little poem. Doggerel, he liked to do that, and Reagan said, "Tip, if I had a ticket to heaven and you didn't have one too, well, I'd give my ticket back and go to hell with you." That was sort of the spirit of the time. And there was a sense of humor about things. I can't tell you how many times we played tricks on the chief of staff, Jim Baker, and because it was so much fun. The fun
it doesn't seem very fun right now. It doesn't seem. I wonder why anyone would want to be president at this point.
We're slogging through, and every day, it's hard to stay glued to the television. I feel a duty to watch, but gee, it sure ain't fun.
It's not fun at all. Well, it's hard to imagine the same thing happening when you have Kevin McCarthy, who actually voted against certifying the election. So,
yep.
How do you make inroads with that?
I think my fear is that in the next few years we're not going to find the leadership we need. It's too much poison. It's too much like Kevin McCarthy. It's too much cowardice about not standing up against Trump, and if they can't stand up against him for the fourth indictment, there's something seriously amiss in the Republican Party. That's not the Republican Party I knew 20, 30, 40 years ago, which was a party that believed in law and order, a party that believed you pay attention to the law and you abide by the law, not a party that tries to overthrow the law. So there a lot of changes have taken place. And it's going to take time to work through them. But critical thing is to get moving on trying to make sure we have generations that are coming up who are going to be strong, tough, resilient, courageous. We need that kind of leadership again. And we're just not seeing it. What we see instead in too many of our young people today is loneliness, drug addiction. And, it's like a quarter of the young people in the country who wanted to go into the U.S. military, they can't pass the test to get into the military. They can't pass the teaching test. They can't pass the physical test. They can't pass. They've got all these tests that they can't make it, and that is a pretty remarkable drop.
Right.
And it's also true that the younger generation doesn't trust institutions now. And they don't trust the leaders of our institutions. That was when I was growing up. and I think many of my friends, we looked up at the World War II leaders, and we thought, thank God we've got people like Roosevelt and Churchill to help save the Western world. My friend Warren Bennett, a long time in Los Angeles. You may remember Warren from a few years ago. He was a guru in leadership, and he used to ask this question: how is it that when in the early days of the Republic, we had 3 million people who lived in our Republic, and among those 3, we were able to find 6 world-class leaders. We had Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Madison, and who was the 6th? Let's leave that for a second. 6. Today, as Warren pointed out, we have 300, Franklin, I think it was. Today we have 330 million people living in this country. We can't seem to find one world-class leader. We need that. We're not going to tiptoe back. We're going to have strong, firm, inspiring leadership.
So you don't see anyone waiting in the wings because it
Yes,
seems
I do. No, I
there-
do see people waiting. in the
okay.
wings.
So it seems like there's a whole group waiting for this
Yes.
next
Yeah.
election to be finished, the next 4 years to come by,
Yeah.
at least on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
And they are going, one of them would be the governor of this state, Gavin Newsom. Another one
Yes,
would be Gretchen
I
Whitmer
agree.
from
Well,
Michigan.
Gavin Newsom, and there's one other person on the East Coast I would recommend who has many of the same qualities of Gavin, but is different. And that is the new governor of Maryland. That Maryland was governed by a Republican who was quite
Hogan?
popular. Yeah, Hogan, who stepped down. And then there was an election, and a young man who won that election, he's 44, is a fellow named Wes Moore. Wes Moore, keep your eye on him. He's a hot commodity in politics right now. He's a young man who grew up black, grew up the wrong side of the tracks, poor family, things went wrong in his life early on. He wound up in handcuffs at the age of 12. Police were after him all the time. His mother, in order to save his life and save his future, she put him in a military academy, Valley Forge Military Academy on the outskirts of Philadelphia. He turned around because of the kind of care that he was getting, the leadership training he was getting. Wound up going to Johns Hopkins University, wound up as a Rhodes Scholar, wound up running the Robin Hood Foundation, which was the largest anti-poverty organization in New York City, and ran for office once. He ran for governor. He was in primaries. He won by 20 points. And then in a general election, he won by 20 points. A guy who never run for office before. He's spellbinding, he's charismatic. And one other thing that not many Democrats do, but is really important, and that is he joined the 82nd Airborne. He volunteered for military service, and he was jumping a paratrooper. Now, this is a young man that everybody who meets him says he's got possibilities. And I don't think he's the only one. The governor of North Dakota is sort of in this race, and he's sort of an unknown in this race. He's actually quite a compelling governor, and deserves to be in the pack, in the leading part of the pack, because he's very good on economics, for example. And I think you can go through. Look at Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. She's another person I think can bring a lot to the table. I think there's some people out there waiting. They've been waiting a long time.
And they're waiting, but they're not going to go against Biden. So they're waiting.
Not going to go against Biden. Yeah, they'll be there after. I don't think Biden will go for a second term. That's out of the question, frankly. But I do think there is a substantial question whether whether he'll stay the course for the first term. There's a chance he will step aside, before this is over, on the theory that he needs somebody else in there in order to win the election. So we'll have to wait and see. But I do think there are people who are willing and ready to stand up, who want to save the country, and they're tough enough to do it. And some of them have enough money to help get started. But they're going to appeal to people's sense of fairness and duty, and a sense of, we must get into the question, deal with the question of race, in the sense that we need people of all races, all backgrounds, all colors, all genders. We need people to get unified and put aside the conversations that don't really matter and move in terms of the civic life of our country, and move to times when we can have things that matter and we get back together again.
So Kamala Harris, you don't think is viable in that department?
I'm not the best judge on Kamala Harris. I will tell you this. That, she's I think she got handed a pretty tough hand set of cards in the beginning. It was really hard to see. I mean, she was asked to be in charge of immigration, and there's been nobody in Washington who's been able to solve this problem in the last 15 to 20 years. Why did anybody think of the vice president who has no formal authority? The vice president might be able to succeed at closing the border. But unfortunately, Kamala has got off to reputationally got off to a rough start. Nobody knows quite why. It just didn't seem to click in the beginning. And there were an awful lot of Democratic strategists who came to the conclusion, white and black, that we need somebody else. I will tell you, I think this, Kamala, during some of this recent times, on the question of this violence and these lawsuits, I think had been doing a better job. I think she's, and I think Biden clearly wants to keep her. You know, he may face a terrible dilemma, and that is all of his advisors came to him and say, Mr. President, you know, you finally moved into polls, you're up at 53%, but Kamala Harris hasn't really cracked 40 very well. She's not moving, and we may lose the election over this. That's not a real, because Joe Biden's not going to want to make that change. And he would probably rather go down with the ship than do that. But you know, if he doesn't stand behind Kamala Harris, there are going to be an awful lot of people in the black community who are going to say, "Wait a minute, we stood by you when you were in trouble, and we put you in the White House, and you really owe us. And if you take her, we're splitting. And if you take her off the ticket, we're going to split."
Well, where would they go? I mean, not to be too cynical about it, but they're not going to vote.
Where would you go? Well, I think they would have. I think they would look for someone like Whitmer, a woman, but you know they would prefer a black woman. You know, there. Some people think you've got a couple of them in Southern California, you know, who are good candidates for this youngish black woman. Yeah.
The mayor of LA. Okay, so getting back to the Republicans, I mentioned Larry Hogan, and
Sure.
he declined to run for president.
Yes.
But when he was governor, was one of the most, if not, one of the most popular governors in the United States.
Yes.
He seems like a reasonable Republican, someone who would be a Republican star in any other era.
Yeah.
What does it say to you that he's not running? There are several other moderate Republicans. Asa Hutchinson is running, but he looks like he's going to be in the debate. What does it say to you that this party can't accommodate anyone like that now on the national stage?
I believe if the Republican Party can't turn around and deal seriously and with adult-like effort to deal with these indictments and the message that we're going to be sending to the young people, if you get indicted 4 times, it doesn't matter. We really don't care. We don't give a damn. If that's our view, the Republican Party, frankly, is going to be finished over time. If our view is let's put this back together, let's see a chance to sort of put something, let's try it. We'll see. I do think so much depends on public opinion now. We tend to get the presidents we deserve. You know, if we don't, if we've got a sort of shoddy expectation for the president, we get shoddy presidents.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this is a moment when the Republican Party, a party at the moment that I don't recognize, but I do believe that the party as recently as George W. and as recently as Ronald Reagan was a much different party and a much better party. And so I think it's not out of reach. We're not that many years removed from George W. But, you know, both he and Reagan, especially Reagan, you know, looks better now than he has in a long time because he seems so sensible. And, you know, there were people at a time when I was growing up, he was seen as a cowboy. And he's, you know, I think he's come a long way. So I think the Republican Party can recover, but how it handles the next few months is going to determine whether it's in for the long haul or whether it's going to self-destruct as a party and be
But
replaced with something different.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anybody's willing to, this doesn't move the needle at all, this fourth indictment. Is
Well,
that-
Madeline, I think that the issue becomes the best way to change our politics if you're in the losing party is to beat the other party 3 times in a row. If when Bill Clinton ran for president back in 1992, he called me the day that he announced, and he basically said, I could have gotten in 4 years ago, but we have a much better situation now, and that is the country has tried 3 different liberals, so essentially northeastern or midwestern liberals, to be the nominee of the party. We've gone down in flames 3 times. Why don't we try somebody like Reagan? Or why don't we start looking to somebody who's a different kind of person? And so anyway, I think the opportunities are there if the will is there.
What about the fact that Joe Biden has accomplished so much during
Yes.
this presidency so far in just a few short years? Huge bills he's gotten through this particularly angry Congress. And these are things that perhaps he should be shouting from the rooftops, telling the voters, this is what we have done for you. Every night, hold some kind of event where he is trumpeting his achievements. Why are they so unwilling, it seems, the Biden administration, to brag about these very significant achievements?
Well, they got your message, and that's, they've had Biden out on the trail, beating the drum for his achievements in the last couple of months. It's been late. It's like the Kamala thing. They've changed their strategy on Kamala. Now I think they've changed their strategy on Biden. These are not easy calls, and I think that Joe Biden has all the credentials that one needs to be a good president. He's not great with words. He's not a great communicator. And, that has become a more important ingredient for leadership these days than what we had 30, 40 years ago. So a Donald Trump, a demagogue, can actually build up a sizable, voting base. And whereas a who like Biden, who gets the work done, but is not charismatic, doesn't get the points he deserved. He's had a hard time cracking 40% approval.
Yeah.
And he's got to get that number up. He's got to get to at least 45, and I think probably 50 before it's over. And it would help, if it was a more united Democratic Party that would, I think, come together too. I think the Democratic Party also leaves some things to be desired as a party, right? But it's still a viable party. I mean, it's still got a set of beliefs that give it some sense of unity, whereas the Republicans are all over the place. And it's a surprise because the Republicans used to be sort of a governing party, but the Democrats were the raise hell party, and they got a lot of that done through the more progressive era of the 60s and 70s. They got a lot done, and of course the FDR days were superb. So each party desperately calls out for change and new people. It does suggest, all of us does suggest to me, Madeleine, that we gave up the smoke-filled room some years ago. Our presidents used to be selected by their peers, and then the smoke-filled room, that's where people would get approved. And then we decided, no, let's throw that out. Let's have all these primaries, all these elections. It turns out, I think we got better candidates and better nominees in a smoke-filled room than we did in the primary system.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
How many people were excluded from the smoke-filled rooms?
Well, a lot of people, and
Like
a lot
women,
of people of
like
color,
people.
women. Yeah, that's true. But I'm telling you, that's spreading too. Look at Tim Scott in South Carolina as a Republican. He's running a good campaign. He might get on the ticket before this is over.
Still heard.
as a vice presidential candidate, if things were changed
But he's
dramatically.
he's a Trump defender. He hasn't come out,
Yeah,
supporting him.
yeah, but you're not going to find many people who are 100% for Trump or 100% against him.
Well,
Um,
but he's come out against these indictments. I mean, he's pretty.
Biden shouldn't say a word about the indictments. Let the prosecutors do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he should say, I support the judiciary. I do not want the judiciary tampered with. Just like we should have made the votes count. We shouldn't have had all this, the yelling and screaming around January 6th. We could do this better. And, so I think that's, I think again, it comes back to, we look at our leaders and say it's up to them. And the truth is we got to look in the mirror and say, to a large degree, it's up to us.
Well, it's up to a small portion of us because we're so entrenched in our camps that there's
No,
just.
are we or no? Yeah, I'm not so. I'm not so.
Well,
perfectly
70% of the Republican Party likes Trump.
70%, yes. Trump has worked has potent magic on his part of the party, and as I said, I think there's a huge amount of cowardice on the part of the party that people. One of the fastest way we're going to get this changed is for people to stand up against Trump and stand up for justice, stand up for mercy. It's again, those of us who are older need to take some responsibility here. We shouldn't just say, oh, it's these other people over here screwing around.
All right, we are at the portion of our evening where we go to the viewer questions.
Sure.
So let me begin with Frank.
Like your questions, they're tough.
Well, we'll have some more in mind too.
Okay.
Frank asks, these are good questions too. Frank asks, will Trump supporters ever perceive that a trial of him is fair? If that's the case, what does the future hold?
I did never perceive what? I didn't understand what.
Trial, if he'll ever get a free trial, a fair trial, fair trial.
I think the losers, especially in the trial, and I think the chances of Donald Trump being found guilty, at least one count, and probably a significant amount more than that. I think the chances are very, very high. That's the case. So the people who are going to be yelling foul are likely to be on the Republican side. But they've had their day trying to push phony arguments, and and it didn't work. And at some point, when you get to 4 different trials, so the guy, you have to feel sorry for him in some ways, because the guy's going to be going from pillar to post between trial, being in a courtroom and being out on the stump. He's going to go a little nuts. I would not be totally shocked if he decides to step down before it's over.
Really?
I wouldn't be totally shocked if he decides he really can't win it and he's going to be humiliated, and his son's had to go through hell. I think it's possible. I don't say it's high possibility, but I do think for the first time it's possible. I think it's possible Joe Biden will step down, but I think it's more likely Biden would step down than Trump would.
What would make Joe Biden step down?
What would make Joe Biden step down?
Yeah.
If he felt the country had gone mad and that it was going to be in the hands of Biden, and that it'd be in the hands of Trump for 4 years, he may decide, maybe we ought to take a flyer on a younger candidate. I think he has it in him. What Trump doesn't. Biden has it in him to put the country first,
Mm-hmm.
and to do what he thinks will serve the country well. At the end of the day, I think that's who he is. Whereas we can see clearly that's not where Trump is.
Right. Okay. Beryl asks, what do you think of a third party efforts like no labels?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that help Trump?
Yes, it would help Trump. I please know that for some years I have been a fan of no labels and of a third party. I thought it's anything to jolt us out of the situation we're in. Where we are now, given the fact that Trump could actually win this election, even though he's in jail, that he could still win. Let me come back with a story on that. Even the fact where he is now, I don't know. I don't worry about it in the same way other people do.
Okay. Because, but wouldn't they pull from the Democratic side?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the likelihood is that if you're in the middle and you're undecided, you've already looked at Trump and you've already decided that he's not my guy.
Yeah.
And you become an independent. And the numbers, the trend line among independents as opposed to Republicans, because the trend line is that independents are beginning to become much more serious about whether Trump can actually win the election. And they're getting pessimistic about it, whether he can win. And they may really try to push him out.
Larry asks, you are an authority on leadership. What are we missing today? Is courage/spine a quaint anachronism?
No, Churchill was once asked, what's the most important quality a leader needs? And he said courage, because without that, you get nothing else. You can't get anything else done. There are other people who believe that character is the most important, or your capacity to persuade is most important. But in the times we're in right now, courage, I think, remains at the top. And the book, John F. Kennedy wrote the book, 70 years ago now, Profiles in Courage. And it was one of the most popular books about the Congress and people in Congress. It was mostly senators that he wrote about, people who had been in the Senate at one time or another. He wrote some really stirring stories. Kennedy was in the hospital. He looked like he might die in the hospital, but he got very, very involved in writing this book, and it turned out extremely well. And I think if you look now, I've just been reading books on Churchill, and I just say, they're stunning, because the capacity to take the heat, to go up on, when the German planes were flying over, he'd be up on the rooftop, openly up on the rooftop, where he could get killed very easily. But he insisted that's where the action was.
But isn't it true that there is courage everywhere you look, maybe not necessarily in government, but in other places? I'm just thinking of these young kids who filed a lawsuit against Montana and won.
I'm so glad you raised that. I think the people who are really showing a lot of courage these days and moral purpose tend to be Black, or other people of color, and they tend to be women. I think Black women have sort of occupied a high moral ground in our national social life. I think that they have shown a lot of courage. You look at Rosa Parks and a long tradition, coming down from that, and people willing to do really gutsy things. We're making. The interesting thing, Madeleine, is we're beginning to succeed with women making their way in the world, and it's really to be welcome. We're a long way from the goal line, but it's much better than it was. Women have been really working hard at success, whereas young men have gone just the opposite. There are a variety of indices now about what's happening in the young male community, and as I mentioned, loneliness and drugs and that sort of thing. It's also true. Well, I'll give you the statistics. The statistic that blew my mind. You and I, we grew up at different times, but during most of that time, young men were the dominant number, the dominant force in college. Men were going, young women were taking jobs. That has changed. In the last year or so, of the 100 baccalaureate degrees granted or awarded by a university, for every 100, 74 went to women. Think of that. That is such a wonderful number. And it's one of the things that gives me hope as we go forward.
So we need, what's going on with the men? What's happening with them? Why are they in such distress?
I think that they don't know what their roles are anymore. It's not obvious, and it's easy to be it's easy to lose your way in this situation. That I've come to the view that one of the most important things we can do, and I think would be very helpful. And interestingly enough, Gavin Newsom and Wes Moore are the two proponents of it. Is something called national service.
Mhm.
That is an expectation that every young person between the ages of 18 and 24 will have an opportunity to, if they wish, to serve the country in some fashion, not in the military, but in civilian clothes. And so, replicating in some ways what was called the old Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s. And Civilian Conservation Corps was started by Franklin Roosevelt early in his presidency. It was in the spring of 1933, just after he'd been inaugurated. FDR announced a program, the CCC program, saying we want young men to come and volunteer to work in the parks and in the forest, reforesting the country, and we'll pay you for it. Well, by that summer, the U.S. had 250,000 young men in the parks and the timber and doing that. It was the most popular program in the New Deal. It gave these young men a job. It gave them the discipline of showing up for work. They belonged to something bigger than themselves. There was a moral purpose in it. That to me is ideal. That's the kind of thing I think we should be building.
I agree. I think
America, I
great idea.
think.
Well, but that idea has been floated so often in the past and hasn't come to pass, even though it is bipartisan. It's a bipartisan idea.
Yep.
Why can't we get that? I think a lot of people would vote for that, would love that.
Every time I go into a community and before an audience and raise it, I get a lot of support. I've asked the same question, Madeleine. Why in the world can't we get this done? Because it's so straightforward. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer. What I do know is that Wes Moore, in coming into office as a really charismatic figure, he had two ideas that he proposed for his first term in office. One was child poverty, to address child poverty, and the other was national service. But he made the point, and I've talked to him about this. He made the point we should start small on national service. AmeriCorps should be small. That's what Gavin Newsom did out in California. I talked to the guy out there who runs that program, and they started very small to get proof of concept, and then they were able to go out and raise some money. And now they've had 10,000 people come through this program on the service side. I think it can be done. I just think, again, it's not going to appear. It's not going to just happen overnight. Explode in front of our faces. It takes work. It takes perseverance. It takes patience. These things, some things take a long time. Look how long we've been working on the environment and how little real progress we've made in terms of our commitment, which is shocking.
Well, I could argue we haven't been working hard enough on it.
Oh, exactly. Now it's shocking. I mean, you're absolutely right. We should not be talking about a lot of the stuff we're talking about, the junk we're talking about. We should be talking about how we're going to save the planet.
And that is the existential question, as far as I'm concerned. That is the most important question there is, because it's all about our survival.
I totally agree. You see, and I think you could get young people to be part of a conservation corps.
Mm-hmm.
To do things. The neighborhoods are going to be safer.
All right, I'll ask the final question from Ted. How do you view the media today? It seems that the economy is doing well, and yet the media, he says, invariably focuses on the slightest wrinkle that isn't positive. Well, that's the job.
I miss the Walter Cronkites and Ted Couples and so many others who've come through. I worked with a number of these people when all of us were young, and it's the World War II generation, basically. What Brokaw called the youngest, the best generation. And I think we could have another best generation if we work at it. So overall, again, I'm a short-term pessimist, but a long-term optimist.
In terms of the media, I will.
In terms of the United States, and by the way, I think the media is not oblivious to the fact that it's that let's take Trump. the president of CNN, I was on a panel with him once, and he said, we enable too much. We gave Trump too much coverage, basically. He got so much coverage, it squeezed everybody else out, and made it very, very difficult for anybody else to win. He did it smartly. But also it changed the dynamic. Trump emerged from it a much stronger candidate, in part because the media displayed this guy who seemed very charismatic, but he was also strong. I mean, you have to say Trump looks strong. He encourages people to look, tough. And I think that's part of his authoritarian streak that I think has helped him in his life. So I do think that the media is going to do a better job this time. It's going to be more careful, more cautious about coming down in one way or the other. Fox News is not what it once was. It's still conservative, but it's not radically conservative, and is not out peddling lies these days. So I think there are some self-corrections that are going on in the press, but do we have enough? Do we have enough Ted Koppels? Do we have enough Jim Lehrs? We could use some more. We could use some more. They were dear people. They cared about each other. There were a lot of women who came. Women got their tell-all through, in many cases, through the media. Because they became media figures, and then they've done very, very well. And we have repeated evidence now that if you have more people of color and more women on corporate boards, they will get greater success in the marketplace.
How do you view, I don't know if you can talk out of school about CNN, because you raised it. They did air that Caitlin Collins Trump interview too much.
Yeah, I think in retrospect they would have done it differently. It was you've got to say about Caitlin Collins, she's a gutsy woman.
She is, and she's
she tried to stand up to him, but he's just he's big, and he's just overpowering, and it was an impossible task for her to calm down. I was glad she survived, and CNN I think had the wisdom to give her a major position.
But that raises the question: do you put Trump on the air for a live one-on-one interview?
I think Trump ought to be. I don't think Trump ought to be given a free ride.
But
I think he ought to be just held up to he ought to be held up to the standard of responding to questions, from the press.
But he won't answer them. He'll just lie or obfuscate.
Well, he's got to be called on. He's got to be, it's got to be. So you got to post things so people know. I mean, I don't know. There is such thing as free speech. We shouldn't just assume we ought to shut him down, or can shut him down, or would be a good idea to shut him down? Would we be more comfortable in life if he wasn't around? Yes, but I do think the First Amendment's a very important part of our constitutional arrangement.
Okay, we are at the end of our program. That went by so fast. Do you have any final words you'd like to end on?
Yeah. Forward. Let's go. Madeleine, I appreciate, David, you come back. I appreciate you folks being on the air, but help us get out of this mess. It's really, you stick to it. You're at what, 171, 172 now? Go faster than these trials.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you so much. It was great talking with you, and I'm so glad to make
Thank you.
So thank you. And thank you so much for watching this, and tune in definitely next week on Wednesday. I'll be back with Mary Ziegler, and we're going to talk all about abortion and what's happening. Lots of news just out today. So that'll be a really timely and interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I will see you next Wednesday.